As I'm recording this video, it is September of 2022, and what that means is the Sony A7S III, the camera we're discussing today, is now 2 years old because it was released in September of 2020. It also means that it's the time of year where all the companies release their new products in order to get ready for Christmas. So I thought it would be the perfect month to discuss whether or not the Sony A7S III is still a worthwhile buy in 2022 and beyond. What's up guys, thank you for joining me. I'm your host Sam, and as I said, today we're discussing the A7S III, but this isn't my full review of that camera. If you're looking for a full in-depth review that gets into the specs and features of the A7S III, you can find it up here or down in the description of this video. So before we get into it with this camera, I want to give you guys a little bit of a disclaimer. Every single time I post an is it still worth it video or just reviews in general, if I say anything at all negative about what we're talking about, I get a whole bunch of comments that are like, you don't know what you're talking about and it's still amazing and that camera is going to be amazing until the end of time. And I understand the feeling behind that. I'm still paying off the A7S III, and there is nobody on planet Earth that wants it to stay relevant and top of the line like I do. So my disclaimer is this: I am going to say some negative things about the A7S III in this video, but before you go down to the comments and let me know how stupid I am for doing so, just realize that modern technology is outdated almost instantly nowadays. Everything is released so quickly that by the time you have the money in your hand and you've decided to go buy something, that company is probably already planning the marketing for 2 generations ahead of it. It's just the nature of the world that we live in. Everything is released lightning fast. To top it all off, technology has been so great for so long and advancing so quickly that even if all the tech that you own is like 10 years old, it's still better than most of the versions of that tech that have ever existed in human history. So I'm sure a lot of you are just here to figure out whether or not this is still a worthwhile camera to buy in 2022, just like the title of the video says. I promise that all the points that I just made directly relate to my answer to that question. I also want to get a little bit more acquainted with the specs and features of this camera so that we can talk about it in relation to its competition or the possible future versions of it that Sony may release, like the A7S IV. One of my main reasons for making this video is because the A7S III is a wildly popular camera.
The A7S III from Sony A7S Mark III.
And there's a reason it's as popular as it is. It's a great all-around camera. However, it is 2 years old and they are still asking full price for it at $3,500. Let's talk about what you're getting for $3,500 when you buy the Sony A7S III. First of all, you're getting a 12.1 megapixel full-frame mirrorless camera that's absolutely outstanding at capturing video. You can also do stills with this camera, but given that it's part of Sony's S line, it is geared more towards video specs. Alternatively, if you were looking for a similar camera that focuses on higher photo specs and higher resolution stills, I would say go for something like the A7R IV, because the R line of cameras from Sony is more geared towards photography. If you were looking for something that was good at both in the same price range, I would say go for the A7 IV, because that's Sony's hybrid camera. But don't get me wrong, even though I'm saying that the S line from Sony is more geared towards higher video specs, the A7S III is no slouch when it comes to photography. want to talk about this camera's specialty, which without a doubt is capturing video. And I also want to talk about the specs that make this camera as popular as it is. Arguably, one of the more important features on any video camera are the frame rates that it offers. On the A7S III, you're getting 4K 24, which I'm shooting in right now. You're also getting 4K 60 for slow-mo. You're getting 4K 120 for even slower mo. And then if you wanted to bump the resolution down to 1080p, you can even shoot in 240 frames per second for ultra slow-mo. Luckily, this camera has 3 memory banks on the dial, so I can load them up with 4K 24, 60, and 120. Those 3 frame rates cover a lot of ground as far as frame rates are concerned. I almost never change them to anything else. This is actually a really interesting stopping point as far as resolution, frame rate, and file size are concerned, because 4K 120 already fills up my memory card very quickly, so I don't know that I would even want anything more than 4K 120. In order to use 4K 120 in this camera, you need to buy a V90 UHS-2 SD card or a CF Express Type A card, and they're very expensive per gigabyte. So my 256 gigabyte SD card cost me $300. So my whole point is 4K 120 is about the peak of the mountain for me right now. If anything came out, like the newer version of my camera came out, the A7S IV drops tomorrow, and it's around the same price point. I'm not gonna feel bad that I'm missing out on higher frame rates, because 8K 60 or 8K 120 is going to take up a ridiculous amount of hard drive space. And there's no real reason to be shooting in 8K unless you're cropping in a lot, because not many people have 8K displays in the first place. There's no 8K cell phones that I know of, there's very few monitors or TVs that I know of, and I can't really think of any other practical purpose for it. Of course, your maximum frame rate and resolution is not the only thing that you should be worried about when you're selecting a new camera to buy. It's kind of like horsepower in a car. If you're shopping around for cars, it's not the only thing that you're worried about, but it is one of the first numbers that you're going to read about them when you're selecting which one to buy. And for all my fellow maniacs out there that actually enjoy color grading, another important video feature is the color bit depth. My previous camera, the A7 III, shot in 8-bit 420. This camera shoots in 10-bit 422. And the difference between an 8-bit camera and a 10-bit camera is pretty astonishing. An 8-bit camera can capture over 16 million different shades of color. A 10-bit camera can capture over 1 billion different shades of color. But how does this apply to the topic at hand and what we're talking about? When I finally upgraded to the A7S III and I went to 10-bit color depth from 8-bit color depth on the A7 III, the first thing I noticed was how much nicer the colors are. Not the resolutions, not the frame rates or the codecs or the ergonomics. Literally the first thing I noticed that was way nicer on this camera was the color. And this brings me back to the hypothetical question: what if Sony releases the A7S IV tomorrow and it's around the same price that I just spent on the A7S III about 6 months ago? I don't know that just higher resolutions like 8K would really make me feel like I missed out or I misspent my money or I need to upgrade. However, if they release the newer version of my camera and it's around the same price and it has something like 12-bit 444 internal, which is the next logical step, now we're talking about 68 billion different shades of color that the camera can render, and that would definitely get me scratching my head and wondering if maybe I should have waited and spent my money on the newer version. What's the next logical feature to look at on a camera before you buy it? We've talked about frame rates and color bit depth and all that stuff. The next thing I would look at is how it performs as far as autofocus is concerned. I know that's blasphemy for a lot of video guys, but I almost exclusively use the autofocus on this camera and it hasn't failed me yet. With that being said, and in the context of our video, I don't even know what Sony could do with the autofocus if a newer generation of this camera came out that would be so great that it would warrant an upgrade and a $3,000 to $4,000 purchase. Of course, never say never. Autofocus can always get smoother and smarter and better, and they might come out of left field with some crazy feature like Canon's eye control autofocus that they just released, but even with all of that, I can't see better autofocus being enough to make people want to spend the extra money on a whole camera body upgrade. I would be remiss if I didn't mention things like the fully articulating screen or the viewfinder or the ergonomics and buttons on this camera. Those things could always be better on any camera. You could make the screen sharper and brighter. The same goes for the viewfinder. You could make the ergonomics a little bit more tailor-made to your style of shooting and where you like the buttons to be. But those things aren't really selling points in my opinion. I'm sure that the newer version of my camera will have a better screen and better ergonomics and better buttons, but is it going to be so much better that it warrants spending another $3,500 or $4,000? I really don't think that it will. I'm gonna cut it off with the features there. We've covered most of the important ones, and I don't want this video to be 3 hours long. Finally, the answer to the question, is the A7S III still worthwhile in 2022? And it's not really a yes or no question, but if you had a gun to my head, I would probably say yes. However, that's just for me. I already own a bunch of Sony lenses, and I know that video is my forte, so for me, the A7S III is a yes. For you, the factors may be completely different. Let's say hypothetically you want a camera that's just as good at photography as it is at video, and you want it to be around the same price range, and you don't own any lenses yet. I would probably suggest something like the Canon R5 in that case, because it's very good at photo and very good at video. And the thing is, in the modern day, in 2022, it's really hard to find a brand of camera or a specific camera body that sucks at anything. Like, most cameras are amazing nowadays. If you look back 15, 20 years and you look at those cameras and their specs, there are so many features that we take for granted nowadays. As for the Sony A7S III, it is as much camera as I need right now and for the foreseeable future. I would have to see some crazy spec increases or some very innovative features to want to spend the money to upgrade to anything newer. So in closing, the Sony A7S III is still definitely a worthwhile camera to purchase in 2022, at least for me. If I still had the $3,500 in my hand and I walked into a camera store tomorrow, it's still the camera that I would pick out 2 years later. It's definitely gonna stay in my camera bag for years to come, and I hope I get a lot of use out of it. And that's all I got. If you got something out of this, consider going down and hitting the like and the sub button. It means the world to content creators like me. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Sam Has a Spending Problem, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.